Good morning. Imagine together that God makes everything beautiful. This morning, I want to imagine what is possible at Plymouth and in Fort Collins. I want us to get out of our heads and imagine with our hearts. I want us to listen to God's voice. Imagine the possibilities that lie ahead for Plymouth. Imagine what can be done with our beating and bleeding hearts in this place and in the wider community. Imagine hospitality that defies every cultural norm to reckon with our culture's pervasive power and authority. Imagine a church that lives out its call to be a safe and loving place with unmatched grace and holiness for all of us, especially the least of us. Take this month to imagine together, what if we spend the next 30 or so days getting away from political rhetoric and ideologies that often disconnect us from the other. Step away from what you think may or may not be accurate and simply be in relationship. Wonder about people's on-the-ground experiences. I know, Plymouth, you are already so good at this, but now is an opportunity to become really good at this. The prophet Elijah could do this. Elijah imagined possibilities for Naaman that Naaman could not imagine for himself. He imagined a scenario where Naaman could know a God of grace and mercy. So Elijah got creative and imagined. In this story, Naaman, an influential army captain, has a painful and embarrassing skin disease called leprosy. And because of this, he is considered unclean and could not attend worship or any other important events in the kingdom. The prophet Elisha sent to perform a miraculous and healing on Naaman. Elijah means God is salvation. The understanding was that Naaman was under the authority of the king, so he needed to be healed by the authority of a prophet of Israel. Elijah had some different ideas about what Naaman needed for healing. Elijah knew this healing of Naaman's skin was not just physical, but moral. We know the body keeps score. Elijah imagined another way. He avoided taking center stage, and instead he shared the platform with another. The only way for Naaman to heal was to allow the most marginalized character in this story, a young child, to take the center platform. Children are often mentioned in the Bible, but are rarely the focus of the story's interpretation. And in this story, it is the girl who takes center stage and courageously offers an alternative way of healing. What I became most interested in the story is how the most unlikely person in the ancient world could provide wisdom and teaching to a powerful army captain. The girl is a slave, a prisoner of war, and she has no name. And she offers insight and a lens into the story that often gets neglected. Who would imagine a story where God inspires a prophet, but then the prophet turns around and uses their power and influence to center someone with no power at all, and that person ends up bringing healing to Naaman? And so I wonder, How do the isms and phobias in our culture affect our choices or our expectations regarding our giving to each other, particularly in terms of generosity? I'm talking about racism and sexism and classism and transphobia and ableism, to just name a few. Imagine a church dismantling the rigid structures that often find us trapped and sick under the skin of leprosy. What creative ways might God be calling us to bring about healing in our world? Elijah undid Naaman's status by placing a young, powerful girl in his path. This would prepare him for his eventual return to Syria with an orientation toward the God of Israel. Let me be clear, God's voice shows up in the pain and in the fear and in the powerlessness, as so often happens in our gospel. Imagine the possibilities if we stop and really listen to the other. When we hear one another's stories, when we know just how powerful that is when we know just how powerful the church can be, and we can imagine God's vision for the world. I came across this story of what happens when we listen to the other. In 1965, priest and professor and author Henry Nouwen felt restlessness and fierce gnawing and a painful question: why aren't you in Selma? Most of us know about the 1965 historic Civil Rights March from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. Henry Nouwen believed in freedom for all, but kept on having excuses for himself. There's no time, and there's no money, and I don't have the courage. After Martin Luther King Jr. appealed to help his people in the struggle for freedom, he kept on asking those gnawing questions. Should I go to Selma? But I can't because I'm nervous. I can't because I don't have the time. Nouwen could not get out of his head, it's not my work, it's the work of the local people. You're just looking for thrills and excitement. But the question kept on hounding him: why aren't you in Selma? And finally, at 11 p.m. on March 28, 1965, Nouwen knew that he needed to be there. So he got in his car and he started to drive from Topeka, Kansas to the deep, deep south of Alabama. In Vicksburg, Mississippi, a black man, Charles, age 20, was standing by the roadside. And after climbing into the car, he said, "God has heard my prayer. He sent you as an angel from heaven. Nobody would pick me up." He told Nouwen he really wanted to be in Selma to help his people. And as they drove through the night, Charles told Nouwen how he'd been imprisoned 5 times in the fight for freedom. He demonstrated with thousands of others for the integration of schools and courts and restaurants and shops. And he told Nouwen about his friend, Medgar Evers, the civil rights champion who was murdered. As Charles continued to tell his personal story, Nouwen gradually began to understand and feel a sense of freedom disappear. Nouwen understood that this country is Charles's enemy and became scared of his journey to Selma. The fear became deeper and deeper as they rode on. And then he wrote this. This is a quote. "The fear gave me new eyes and new ears and new mouth." As a white man, Nouwen had centered this black man's story in his healing narrative. Nouwen began to understand that perhaps the moral illness of his skin was being washed, maybe 7 times, And the more Nouwen drove deeper into the South, the deeper his relationship with Charles and the healing of his white skin began. Nouwen might have thought he was giving a ride to someone in need, but in hearing Charles' story, he found a deeper connection to what it was that he needed, a more honest understanding of America. Nouwen tells the story of God's fools in Selma. He tells the story of Martin Luther King Jr. being the new Moses. He tells the story of the fear and courage he experienced each day that demonstration and march for freedom. And as the march closed in 1965, he overheard a black boy say, "The greatest thing about this march is the preachers and the ministers and the priests who all showed up." Now we know that the church is behind us, the boy said, and we feel strong. What the boy didn't know is that it was not the whole church universal that was behind them. It was the beatniks, the angry ones, the offended ones, the ones who could not stand by any longer. There is still so much work to do 50-some years later. Plymouth knows this work. You've done this kind of work before. I love hearing the story of how this church took a risk in the early 1990s to call an openly gay pastor to serve here. Of how, despite the mean-spirited attacks and fear of people leaving the church, Plymouth wanted to be on the right side of history. So let's imagine. Imagine how God is calling us to the deep wells of our cultural divisions today, the divisions that still prevails. We heard it from Aaliyah and our LGBTQ+ communities, the divisions of our immigrants, the divisions of men and women. Imagine Plymouth, where are we afraid that God is calling us that might give way to new eyes and ears and mouths. Naaman was healed through the wisdom and insight of the child, the least of these in the ancient world. Henry Nouwen answered the gnawing and courageous call to leave the comfort of his home and be in relationship alongside our black siblings. And here in our church, we have seen how we can make history too. How might we imagine what it means to stand with our Haitian siblings? How might we imagine making way for our trans community? And how might we imagine listening to stories of the Palestinians and the Israelis? We are on the 1-year anniversary of that war. The world needs churches that dream of a different kind of world and are full of people who are willing to let others know we are with them, with those people on the margins. This is why I give to church. It's the kind of church I get excited about and believe in. Let's imagine together, because God makes everything beautiful. Amen.